Hello, I'm Charles Coves, Australasia's passion provocateur. Welcome to this week's episode of the Charles Coves Show, whether you're watching on Rumble or on YouTube or listening via one of the many podcast platforms. It's great to have you here. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do so if this show is of interest to you. I'll discuss a few current local and global issues that might be exercising your mind or impacting on your humanity, and then consider how the self-awareness and passion principles can help you make better decisions for the benefit of your life. And remember my definition of passion. It's a source of unlimited energy from your soul that enables you to produce extraordinary results. Imagine having unlimited energy. That's what my work on passion does for you. I will share some resources this week in handling some of the issues that I talk about. The show notes give you links to the foundational principles of the show and details about my background. And they also contain links to our websites coves.com and charlescoves.com, where there are lots and lots of resources that will help you live life on your terms. And you can find out more about the Self-Awareness and Passion Quest, which is an executive one-on-one coaching program to have you live your life on your terms. That's the test. Are you living life on your terms? Are you free to live life on your terms? Again, please subscribe to the show. It won't cost you anything except the risks of greater passion, greater awareness, and a greater enjoyment of your life. Now, that's worth having. So let's go with this week's big impact issues. And of course, in Australia on the 25th of April each year for 110 years is the celebration of Anzac Day. And I want to bring to your attention the deep truth behind Anzac Day and why it is so important in Australia, and with the whole point of Australia being at war. Now, in the Australian newspaper, a Murdoch publication, on the 25th, it always has lots of articles written on about Anzac Day. And two things I want to bring to your attention. Number one, the editorial says this in the first paragraph. As always, Anzac Day touches the hearts of Australians wherever they are in the world like no other national commemoration. And rarely over the past 80 years has it been held amid such elevated strategic tensions. The dangers are not lost on the fading ranks of the great generation of diggers who put on the uniform to defend the nation and the freedoms for our European cousins. In other words, going to war for Australians in World War I and World War II was about defending the nation so that we maintained our sovereignty, our freedom to decide what we do with this country, and secondly, defending our freedoms and then the freedoms of the countries with whom Australia was then in alliance and in alliance now. 100,000 Australians died in these wars fighting for freedom. Now, you might go on to some geopolitical issues and what's the truth about wars? Well, as you know, the history of wars are written by the victors. But the fact is, people sign up to fight to defend their nation, to keep sovereign. So I really want to help you understand at this amazing week when there was a Pope's funeral, which saw all of the leaders of the major countries on the planet together in Rome. And it was Anzac Day, and then last week it was Easter. I want you to contemplate these global issues. And then the editorial in the paper said, there's large strategic tensions. I wonder about that, but certainly from an Australian perspective, there's a lot of stuff in the media talking about how are we going to defend ourselves against Chinese incursions. By the way, the other issue that I wanted to raise from the paper, this is on the back page of the first section, the culture of Anzac, dawning of the fair go nation. And this long piece is really quite insightful, and it says what Anzac did was create this culture of giving people a fair go. Now, where that where that relates to is what is a fair go? And most people say, well, certainly Australians would say, give a bloke a fair go, and in a tough, rough environment as it was in the 19th, early 20th century, don't rip people off, give them a fair go. Well, I want you to think about this word. What's a fair go mean? As a lawyer, I practiced law for 20 years. I've had a law degree now for over 50 years. When I say to people, do you want justice? They say yes. Then I say to them, what is justice? The word that almost everybody then responds with is fairness. Okay? Justice equals fairness. And Australia is a great country under huge attack now by evil leftist forces, in my view. But we do give people a fair go in this country, and fair go is a just go. Now, justice is then delivered by the law. And so you then start to go, gosh, how will I get justice? And how does that relate to freedom? Well, if you can't rely on the legal system to protect your rights, then you are at grave risk of a loss of your freedoms. And I'm going to articulate what those freedoms are so you get a very practical understanding, because you might say, well, I'm free, I can drive down the road and I'm free. There's a whole string of attacks going on, and Anzac Day is a great time to remind us. I've talked about freedom a lot because that's what drives everything I do, relating to passion so that you're free to pursue your passion, relating to industrial hemp so that farmers can make lots of money and be free of government control. In terms of health, all right, health is so important because if you're not healthy, you're not free. In terms of the law, as the legal strategist, the law is designed to protect you. That's the whole purpose of the legal system, to stop people with the power imposing themselves on you. Otherwise, they would take all the power, a bit like we are reported about the Chinese Communist Party, what it would be like in Australia if the communists came. What would it be like? Think about that. What would it be like? I'm going to touch on that just quickly. I've got to do this pretty quickly because I don't want to take up too much of your time. So if we had lost control of our nation, someone had taken over, and so that you can't do what you want to do, you are not free. And if the law doesn't protect you, then, you will be told what to do by those in power. And the problem is today, those in power are dominating your life, and it's subtle. It's like the classic Communist Party strategies of salami tactics, where they take away a little bit of freedom, a little bit of freedom, a little bit of freedom. Suddenly your salami, like a thin slice of salami, suddenly your salami of freedom has gone. Now, let me explain to you the specific issues that I'm concerned about, why I fight for freedom. Well, as I said, the law is all about freedom. Capricious judges put your freedom at risk. If judges don't observe the law, they just make up their own minds, as I see happening with decisions made by President Trump. All Americans are at risk. In Australia, I know in relation to the last 5 years, judges have been incredibly biased against people fighting for our rights and our freedoms. Our judges are not beyond corruption. Many of them, I say, are politically influenced and they are not applying the law properly. And when you think about what is the ultimate sanction of a judge hands down a verdict. If you've committed a crime or breach of the corporations law, what's the worst sanction that can happen to you? The answer is you can be put in jail. Well, what's the sanction? It's the loss of your freedom. You are in jail. But guess what? It's pretty secure. I mean, you might get raped a few times, but it's pretty secure. You get food, clothing, shelter for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. You've got security, but you haven't got your freedom. And most people don't want to go to jail because they want freedom. So the ultimate sanction is to take away your freedom. So why don't you fight for your freedom? Why don't you speak up about the loss of your freedom. So I'm going to give you specific issues about which you can speak up. The next one, unreasonable laws imposed by municipal, local government, state government, federal government, and the three layers of government, all wherever you are listening or watching this show. All right, unreasonable laws put your freedoms at risk. I'll give you two examples. Driving at 30 kilometres an hour. The state, Victoria, the state that I'm in, led by a Labor leftist government, the worst previously by dictator Dan Andrews, worst government in Victoria's entire history since it was founded as a colony in 1851. They're proposing, for safety reasons, we should reduce the driving speed in the cities from 60 kilometres an hour to 30. You just look at what that's doing, the impact on your productivity. This is unreasonable. And the point is, if each one of us thinks something is unreasonable, we have to do something about it, because we're talking about a fair go. That's the Aussie spirit, a fair go. Well, what is fair? Well, that's up to people to decide. And if 60 or 70% of people decide then that it should stay at 60 kilometres an hour, then it should. But if no one peeps, no one says a word and just gives up, then governments get away with these unreasonable laws. The second example is governments overspending, as they are in Victoria, as they are in Australia, as they are in many countries, and that puts your freedom at risk in numerous ways. I'm going to articulate those, but one of them that really impacts on day-to-day living is that in Victoria, the roads are in a shocking state, as they are in many states in Australia. Why? Because governments are spending money on LGBTQI bullshit, on transgender, on culture wars, instead of dealing with the issues that really matter to most people. And of course, most people go, well, I can't do anything about the roads. Well, what they're doing is they're not repairing the roads, and instead of repairing the roads, they're reducing the speed limits on the open road from 100 kilometres an hour to 80 kilometres an hour. That has a direct impact on our productivity, on our economic health. And the government says, oh, it's for your safety. No, I want you, government, to fix the bloody roads and don't waste money on ridiculous spending, which is what is happening. Next example. Local government rules on what you can do with your rural property. You're not allowed in Victoria and Australia to cut down a tree. You're not allowed to put up a house unless it complies with the government's requirements. You can buy a 2-acre property in the bush, and the local municipality says you can't build a house on that. Bad luck. I mean, this is bullshit of the highest order. And what we have to do is go to our local government and throw out the councillors and throw out the politicians, very relevant in Australia because we're going to a federal election in 1 week's time. We have to throw these bastards out who take away your freedoms. You see, they say that you're not free to deal with your asset of land because we want to protect the planet for humanity. It's like the climate emergency bullshit. It's bullshit. It's climate terrorism. All right? Anyone who has any modicum of intelligence knows that it's a total scam, it's climate terrorism, and the weapons of the climate terrorists are lies. All you have to do is study one person, Ian Plimer, and all of your concerns will be allayed. Next. Men pretending to be women who go to women's toilets and compete in women's sports are stealing women's freedom, particularly going to the toilets and the change rooms. It impacts hugely on women's freedoms. Next, as opposite to the climate fraud, the climate emergency fraud, the lack of available and affordable electricity, which the Australian government, and shame on the Liberal Party for adopting the net zero bullshit, the lack of affordable and available electricity impacts hugely on your freedom, because if you haven't got power, your life changes dramatically. I've done shows on this in the past. I might do another one so you understand it. Any attack on your availability of electricity damages your life, damages your freedom. Next, 15-minute cities. A United Nations initiative, part of Agenda 2030, that wants to ring you within 15 minutes of your home, all right, creating 15-minute gulags, all right, so that you can only go outside that 15-minute radius of your home twice a week. How would you like that? Are you happy about that attack on your freedom? By the way, this 15-minute cities nonsense is all about smart cities. You don't have to go out of your 15-minute circle. Why are they doing this? To enslave you, to take away your freedom to go where you want to go. Next, informed consent and your right to have bodily autonomy, for you to make decisions based on what goes into your body. What anyone puts into your body is entirely your decision. The Nuremberg Code was clear about this. Do you want government telling you what goes into your body? These governments that have been proven to be corrupt, incompetent, and now the Daniel Andrews story shows that they told lies left, right and centre that we got good medical advice that you should be taking these medical interventions. No, that's another dramatic attack on your freedom. And I want you to think about this. I told you health is one of the reasons why I'm a freedom warrior, because if you're not healthy, you're not free. Well, if you're being jabbed, if you're being forced to take medications, and your health deteriorates, which it will, your freedom is being attacked. Next, red ink costs for business. The administrative burdens on business to comply with all of the rules and the regulations, and the bureaucrats. The number of bureaucrats are increasing massively. Remember, the number one job of a bureaucrat is to keep his job and to create more bureaucrats. So bullshit regulations. You know, the Liberal Party said we're going to get rid of all of these. Donald Trump is getting rid of a lot of these regulations. We have to push back against unreasonable regulations. What we have to do, if you're a small business, is to write back when the government says you have to do this. You say, no, I refuse to do it. And more of us have to do this. If we don't push back, there'll be more of it. Next, diversity, equality and inclusion policies and transgender studies in schools. Take away the freedom of your children to rely on truth. They are being propagandized. Next, the decision by most governments in government schools to cease all spiritual education, religious teaching, spiritual teaching. And I say to you, without spirituality, you are dramatically less free than when you have a deep spiritual foundation for who you are. And remember, passion comes from your spirit, from your soul, from your heart. Next, the attacks on free speech, the disinformation, the misinformation bill. You see, if governments want to take away your freedom, they start by attacking free speech. That's the classic communist ploy. Take away free speech. Push back against it. Speak up. Never be cowed into not speaking and not expressing your views, because that's how these bastards get away with it. No one's speaking up against it. People must agree with it. I'm telling you, people don't agree with all these issues that I'm raising with you. Again, coming back to Australia, if it were invaded by China and became a state, a province of China, all right, we would still be less than the average population of the 50 provinces of China. So what would that mean for Australia to become communist? People seem to be worried about it. Why would you be worried about it? You say you want security. All you need to do to get security is do as you're told. Is that the life you want? Is that a fair go? Is that the true Aussie spirit? Is that what it means to be human? You see, if you don't personalize what is happening into your own life, because this amorphous concept of freedom you haven't thought through, think about what it would mean to have communist China in charge of Australia. And I think back to what it was like for my parents, who were refugees from communist Hungary in 1949, and how shitty it was in Hungary in the 60s and the 70s, where you had to wait 5 years to be able to buy a motor car, where the price of everything was through the roof, where the quality of products was shit because it was all produced by the state. If you want that, For the illusion of security, I pity your thinking ability. In fact, no one like that would be watching this show. So good on you for watching this show. This is the reason why the Anzac message is a salutary reminder, and it gets lost a little bit in the sadness of the occasion, but those 100,000 Australians who have died in war fought for freedom. By you fighting for freedom, you honour their memory. And when you lose your freedom, that's when you'll realise how important freedom is. I say losing your freedom will largely destroy your life. That's why I'm passionate about this topic. Okay, we've got to keep moving. So I've got some resources for you I want to share with you. I wanted to make a comment on the Pope's funeral. I'm a fan of Archbishop Carlo Vigano. He considers Pope Francis to be a black pope. The information that I have is Carlo Vigano, Archbishop, he was excommunicated by the current Pope. He considers Pope Francis to be a criminal, that God will look after him after he's died. Vigano speaks strongly with great authority and take into account, whilst at the time of a funeral, you don't speak ill of the dead, so it's said, the legacy of Francis is deeply, deeply problematic. And it'll be interesting to see when there's some 135 cardinals, 108 of the 135 were appointed by Pope Francis. I prefer Vigano's view that this Pope was not a good Pope, was a disastrous Pope. He was a globalist. He was in favour of no borders. That is bullshit. That just decimates countries. And coming back to the whole question of the Anzacs, we fought to maintain our sovereignty. The Pope wants to remove barriers so everyone can come into Australia, in America, do whatever they like. What crap. My song in this show to bring to your attention is The Distant Call of Home, and we will put the link into the chat by the Orb Weavers. It's a beautiful, poignant, sad song about people lost in war. I commend it to you. It puts you in a very reflective mood. It's well worth listening. Beautiful, beautiful song. My health tip is I've had lots of education over the last week in the context of nicotine. And I've been seeing all these references to nicotine. I've done a fair bit of study on it now. I recommend that you do your own research on it. It is amazing the fraud that's been perpetrated on you. Let me just say I support the basis of the arguments by Brian Ardis, and who's a doctor of chiropractic. Of course, medical doctors poo-poo a doctor of chiropractic. I have very little faith in any medical doctors. They have been so brainwashed. The medical doctors are one of the 5 groups that enabled the whole lockdown fraud to be perpetrated. Had doctors spoken up against what was being done, there would have been no lockdowns. So Brian Ardis, I prefer his view on how the body functions. Nicotine, here's a striking fact. The vegetable that contains the most nicotine is tobacco. The vegetable that contains the second most is eggplant. Tomatoes have nicotine. Potatoes have nicotine. When you look into the science, the proper science, and the fact that nicotine per se is not addictive, we have been sold a lie. And when you say, what about people who smoke? They're addicted. Do you know that it's not just tobacco in those cigarettes? There's some 600 chemicals added to those cigarettes. 600 chemicals. So you tell me which one's causing addiction. Next, the Australian election is on Saturday, the 3rd of May. People say, I have to vote for one of the major parties. You can't have chaos. Yes, you can have chaos because the system that we've got at the moment is destroying Australia. I agree with Professor Ian Brighthope, who says that we are not at a crossroad, we're at a precipice. We can either go down, collapse over a precipice and destroy ourselves, or we can understand these threats to our freedom by these leftist controlling governments, and including the Liberal Party that's not doing much better. I am voting for independent, newly emerging freedom parties, and I urge you to do the same. It is crucially relevant, and at the time I'm recording this, the Canadian election is happening. I've heard some shocking stories about the misinformation that's being spread about Mark Carney, the current Prime Minister. Interesting stories that will come out about that bloke. Finally, Julie and I are setting up a new website. I've told you before, we need to hold politicians accountable. This website is going to be called Ban Dick Dan. And it's a place where businesses can register their desire of never serving Dan Andrews or never accepting him as a customer, as a patient, as a client. That includes all the health professionals should never treat Dan Andrews. We need to have that man and any politicians who behave badly, we need to black ban them from any businesses. Now, there will always be people who will work with Andrews because there are businesses who benefited, including the building sector, benefited from Dan Andrews' corrupt, evil, criminal activities. And I say they're criminal because what happened was contrary to law. So this website is designed, please get your friends and business, if you're a business, to register that you will not accept Dan Andrews as a customer. And that's one of the ways in which we're going to hold these politicians to account so that current politicians see that if they ignore the will of the people, then we, the people, will hold them to account when they get out of politics. All right. There it is, a bit longer than I thought, but, I got onto a roll and I'm passionate about this thing called freedom, and I'm passionate about you deeply understanding the threats to your freedom so that you get the fire in your belly to fight for it for your children as well and your grandchildren. I've got 4 of them. Because if we're not going to fight, who is? So I hope today's show makes a beneficial difference to your life. In fact, all I'm doing is giving you more work to do to push back against unreasonable attacks on your freedom. Because I say again, if your freedom is taken away, your life is virtually destroyed. Think of yourself. I'm warning you about the risks of you being locked up in jail for the rest of your life. You might think you're free, but you're not actually. If you're new to the show, check the links again to the foundational principles and our other websites. And again, thanks for watching or listening. Share the show with others, subscribe, get them to subscribe. And until our next show, may your week be full of energy-giving passion, learning, fun, fulfillment, challenge, and ever-increasing self-awareness. Have a great week. See you next week. Bye.